Hi.
Hi,
Hello,
hi.
Prasanna. Good evening.
Good evening.
We're just waiting till a few of our followers join, and also
Okay.
Thilina. I think he's still on his way back home. I think he said he was caught in some traffic, so
Okay.
give him a few
Right.
seconds. But before that, I'd like to just say hello to our audience and good evening, everybody. And welcome to another Advocata Chats discussion. This series is designed in mind to communicate what the current situation and current problems are and to answer as many questions that you, the audience, have. And for today's discussion, we'll be focusing on the current situation in terms of this shortages of foreign currency that we are seeing and how all of this impacts the export sector. And to address these issues today, we have Mr. Prasanna Pinto. He's the CFO of Timex Garments. And we also have joining us shortly is Thilina. As I said before, he is currently stuck in a little bit of traffic and he should be joining shortly. So Mr. Prasanna, since I think we have a few people joining in, if you could just start the conversation, I'd like to ask you just a little bit of background of what Timex is. If you could give us a little bit of background and how and what its role is like in the export sector.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Naqiya. Now we start with the apparel sector. What happened in the now say the industry? We look at the industry. Now, if you look at the apparel industry, is the largest foreign income earner as of now. If you look at contributing 6% of our GDP, and basically sector provide you 350,000 direct employment and 700,000 indirectly. If you look at 1 million is depend on this industry, if you really look at. And historically now, say if you look at 2019, we reached to, the industry has reached around 5.3 billion of revenue. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, it has come to again around 4.1 billion. We just recovered this downturn in 2021. Again, we came to like 5.5 billion revenue target in 21. Just recovered, and this industry is targeting like say in 2025 we should reach around 8 billion. That's how the whole industry is looking at. But unfortunately, we see again power shortages, fuel shortages, lead to many small time establishment in this industry has shut down their factories because they don't have a continuous supply of these goods. And then we see peaceful protests have started and it become again political crisis. This will further complicated, we see further complicated. Again, trade union action will be happening. Now, these are the concern as the industry we are experiencing now, and buyers globally seen this in the global media, and they have a concern in Sri Lanka now. That's how the current situation. On the other hand, our competitors, China, India, now start emerging again. Now we see a again. They are coming to the competition,
Sure. Actually, so
and
if I could just interrupt
yeah,
you for a second, because that was actually
yeah.
one of the questions that I wanted to ask, because there's been a lot of talk about rather importers importing from countries like India now because of the current situation with Sri
Yeah.
Lanka. I was wondering how that has affected, if it has affected your industry or like the export industry as a whole.
Yeah, import actually we have impact. Import we have impact, but I will talk a little on detail. Basically, we don't have any import restriction. You want to talk about import restriction or just Indian
Uh,
import? How?
So I think we could get we can talk about import restrictions maybe a little bit further on, sir. But like you, because you were mentioning that there's more competition coming in from other countries like India.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
wondering how that has sort of affected your businesses, or if it has affected your businesses.
Yeah, basically, if you look at our competition, the Sri Lanka is taking the, like say, if you look at the big piece of cake in China, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, all those countries are taking that one cake. There's a demand, so constant demand is there in the world. This demand is divided in all the countries because of the country situation in the Sri Lanka now. buyers are looking at differently in Sri Lanka. And on the other hand, our prices have gone up. Then all these new prices are coming to play. And that's how China and India has become competitive. That's what I mentioned.
Sure. No, I completely understand. So, because I mean,
Yeah,
we are living in a very interconnected world,
yeah,
so what
yeah,
happens in other countries definitely makes a difference here.
mm, yeah,
Yes, I'm just checking to see if Thilina is
yeah.
coming. Um,
Okay. Then again, I will add something to it. Then the price increases are continuously happening, and now see other countries are giving lesser prices, so their prices are constant. Now we see the suppliers, our buyers are looking at on different ways in Sri Lanka, and now we see the slowdown in the orders. Now, say coming 3 to 6 months, we see buyers are reluctant to place the order in Sri Lanka. That's where currently we are stand.
okay, understood. So, I mean, there's a lot of talks about the current situation and how the fact that we don't have enough
Mm.
foreign currency. I think yesterday,
Mm.
the finance minister said that we have less than 50 million US dollars in
Mm. Mm.
reserves. So, and this, I was wondering how these shortages are affecting your business.
Yeah, shortages basically as a uh, dollar earners, the industry we do have an impact, but rather than foreign currency shortage, we look at this way now. The country rating, I think Thilina will explain that in detail, what happened in the country rating and the liquidity issues in the banking system. That create us more pressure on the day-to-day operation rather than the currency, because we are getting the for currency. Let's say we have all the billing, everything is on the USDs. We are getting the currency, but the banking system, the liquidity issues currently banks are facing will have a we are experiencing an issue because supplier payment, even though we have the money, there is a delay. And on the other hand, our suppliers are not accepting Sri Lankan LCs, Sri Lankan issues LCs, they are not accepting. Because of the country rating, some buyers now asking the advance payment. Those are the issues now currently we are facing the surrounding this dollar shortage. Yes, there's a shortage, but those result in the different way. I think other industries import industries are severely affected. But as far as our concern, those are the critical issues currently we are experiencing. And our working capital, now say, as I mentioned, suppliers are requesting advance payment. Then working capital pressure, what we are getting is huge.
Right, understood.
And then again, finance cost will be more. And then again, coming to the same position what I mentioned, are we competitive in global market? This all this cost.
Exactly. I think you
Mm.
mentioned a really important point there because like competitiveness in
Mm.
global markets is an essential component for
Yes.
I think Thilina is also joined. Let me just quickly
Okay.
introduce. This is Thilina.
Mm.
He's the head of research at Frontier and an economist. Welcome,
Mm.
Thilina.
Mm.
And Thilina, I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you all. Thanks for having me on board.
Thanks for being here. We were just, for our audience here today, we are discussing the role of the export sector and how the current situation is affecting the export industry in particular. Thilina, if I could just, we've been talking a lot about the export industry from a business point of view. If I could kind of rope it back and ask you from an economist's perspective, how important do you think the export industry is for Sri Lanka?
Of course, I mean, for any country, the export sector is essential because if you look at even the consumption side, I mean, they need to depend on the dollar earnings, and that is the basis for the rest of the economy to function. And the key, and I mean, when you say exports, people understand exports to be the goods exports, and the biggest sector of that is apparel. And that has been the biggest driver of our exports since the 90s. But of course, if you expand that, zoom out a bit more, you do also find the services sector exports, which have been very helpful over the Sorry, you might have lost me for a moment since I'm still on the road. I think I was saying is you need to also look at the services export side of it. That adds a few more billion, 12 billion of goods exports, a few more billion of services exports, and we usually in the past had about 6 billion of remittances coming through the formal channels. We've had a problem because of bad exchange policy management. Our formal remittances have gone down. But in looking at overall, that from a current account perspective, the dollar inflows into the country, those two also should be added on to understand the significance of overall exports. You can think of remittances as kind of a labor export as well, right? So adding all of that to really get that picture of the role that exports play. I think
Right, no, for sure. And I think, like you mentioned, like understanding everything that's happening is very important in terms of the context of where we are, why we're here. So I'm curious, Thil, if I could ask you to kind of explain about how we actually got to this particular point. Why have our foreign reserves depleted the way they have? And I mean, I think Mr. Prasanna also touched on this, but what you see that these effects on the export industry or like the country as a whole?
I mean, the Minister of Finance recently was quite frank in saying our usable reserves only, around $50 million, right? And why we are here is because, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, our reserves management has relied on refinancing our external debt, especially the ISBs, so that we can top up our reserves, right? Essentially, they're debt-driven reserves that we've had. And a key critical thing there has been our access to the external markets to borrow new, especially the ISBs or term loans from foreign banks. That has been the crux of our reserves management. But with the tax cuts of late 2019 and then the COVID pandemic, we lost our credit rating and thereby the access to the international markets to keep refinancing. So over the last 2.5 years, we've been essentially having to, on a net basis, pay off our foreign debt while also servicing a current account deficit because our overall dollar outflows are greater than our inflows. So that has been the reason why we've gotten to where we are. And as a result, what's happened as earlier also mentioned in the talk is, as a result, the banking system is having a problem clearing the LCs because the reserves, the central bank's reserves have depleted so much that the role that reserves play as a guarantee for the imports and exports on both sides is no longer applicable because the export sector itself is reliant on imports to add value to those imports. That reminds me of a Korean movie about the 1997 crisis they had called Default, and they kind of define the reserves. When they discover that they don't have usable reserves, they say, "Oh, how are we going to guarantee our import-export trade?" That was their biggest problem at that point. And then they in that movie really very well that I found that very useful way to explain the role that reserves play. When you don't have good reserves, you can't guarantee the export import trade that is vital to the economy, that brings a lot of pain to firms that have been working hard to build their businesses, to build the supply chains, build their clients over the years. That all of that trust they've built in over the years then fails because they can't do the imports to then add value and export and keep to those schedules. So that is the real problem with reserves, and there's a large irresponsibility that was carried out by the previous governor in refusing to accept the crisis over the previous months.
Right. Thank you, Thilina. And yeah, I think you mentioned some great points about how, like you said, they've been topping up all our interest payments, trying to figure out a way to pay back all that we owe. But at the same time, we also need these reserves for basic essentials. And we're seeing this affecting the country at the moment. Like we're seeing fuel shortages, we're seeing shortages in milk powder, we're seeing shortages in essential commodities, and that's an issue. So if I could ask you, Mr. Prasanna, so there are shortages in fuel, and I'm wondering how these power cuts, how are these affecting your businesses?
Yeah. Well, it basically the shortages we look at day to day, we see that issue in the essentials, like example, full shortages, we see the power cuts are there, then generators should work with the diesel. As I mentioned, industry as the small, basically that mainly affected the small timers. Uh, what the how we do is we need to have some sort of the arrangement with these authorities. We tried with we have a joint apparel association through all this organization. We try to at least because the may as I mentioned the as a single largest export earner, our industry should not get disturbed with any kind of this event. Therefore, all this effort has resulted uh, in getting the industry going. But unfortunately, small timers have really impacted because they couldn't afford to the this kind of a capital investment and how getting a proper arrangement of the your power, they have really impacted. But basically the other the high the basically we look at the high level of our exporters, the apparel organizations are currently managing. Unfortunately, small timers have a real impact.
Right. Yeah, no, completely understand, Ms.
Mm.
Prasanna. Like you
Yeah,
mentioned, I think
yeah,
the brunt
yeah,
of all this is being felt by the smaller
yeah,
businesses you mentioned. And
yes, yeah, yeah,
since Sri Lanka is the small and medium businesses are essentially the crux of the Sri
yeah,
Lankan economy, it's
yes, yeah.
definitely hit.
Mm.
Um, Ms. Prasanna,
But that's the starting point. That's the starting point. If you look at, that's how the if really disaster going to if it's happening, that's how it's starting. You start with the small, affecting small timers, then the medium size, then again, if you
of
don't
course,
act quickly, then the next stage is to affect the
yes,
next largest people.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, sir.
Okay.
And I'm curious.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so we've talked about these foreign currency shortages
Mm.
a lot in this conversation. I
Yeah.
think it might be coming up a lot, even with questions
Mm.
in our audience. And one of the
Yeah.
kind of methods that have been used to combat this is import restrictions.
Yeah.
So we kind of curb importing, so we have this kind of
Mm.
stop on
Mm. Yeah.
foreign currency going out. So I was
Mm.
wondering, because I understand you're an exporter, but at the same time, like Thilina also
Mm.
mentioned, exports and imports
Mm.
go hand in hand, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
you need to have imports to export, and in export
Yeah.
industry is a large part of the Sri Lankan economy.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
how
Mm.
these import restrictions have affected your businesses?
Yeah. Basically, import restriction, yes, as a general, it affects to the lot of industries. Basically, what we need to do is anybody who imported earlier, what they need to do, they have to get the mandatory import license from the import controller. As a general, this is the process, and if you want to import, you have to get the license. It's a tedious process. You need to go and get it done with the cost. There's a cost element also, license fee, etc. From the apparel industry, especially on the Timex, if you look at, we do fashion dresses. I will link to how the Timex is affecting this. We do a lot of fashion dresses, not like generic product. It's a fashion dresses. In this restriction list has those elements because dress required as there are certain example I will give you is shoulder pad, beadings, and say lot of ancillaries are there, leather items. Those are come under this list. But as the apparel industry, we also need to get that license before we import. That's the additional burden coming to us as an industry. It has come to us additional burden before ordering. We also need to follow this licensing process, which was not before. With the existing staff, we currently experiencing this process, but it's another burden to our staff. But we have to make sure before they deliver, because as usual, this coming as a one package for the one when you do we import as a package. But we need to make sure that is we have taken the relevant approval before we are we start shipping from the other country. Otherwise, there will be penalties coming. That's basically the how it affects to the industry on this import restriction.
Right. Thank you, sir. Welcome back, Thilina. So we
Yeah.
were kind of talking about import restrictions and how they've been kind of affecting businesses. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain on what you kind of view import restrictions as, and you think it's kind of a viable solution to the foreign currency crisis that we have, or do you think it's not?
Again, sorry guys. So finally managed to get home after like being stuck in traffic for like 2 hours. Actually left office early so that I can get home on time, but that didn't work out, unfortunately. So in terms of import restrictions, of course, a very controversial topic in Sri Lanka because it's a very popular policy tool for governments to throw around. And of course, not just in Sri Lanka, around the world, it's a very popular one. Even Donald Trump, threw around the tariff increases. That's part of the story, right? Increasing tariffs is part of the story. It's not just about banning certain items from imports. It's about, and it creates an illusion that governments are able to balance the import side of things, that they can just throw in an import restriction and balance the imbalances that they've been running for a long period of time. And that's quite misleading because then policymakers think they can, on the run up to elections, drive up demand through fiscal easing, etc. And then after the elections, when you have the balance of payments issues, they throw in the import restriction. And the biggest problem in Sri Lanka is this abuse of the use of import restrictions. Because the Minister of Finance or the Ministry of Trade is able to throw this in these import restrictions overnight by gazetting it. There is no policy process. There is no questioning of the economic gains and losses. They just throw it in. It could be, you could go to sleep assuming that something you want to import is, can be imported the next day at a particular cost, at a particular tariff rate. But the next morning you wake up to find a gazette that says either that is, in temporary suspension, or you need to go pay for a import license, or that you have to pay a much higher tariff for that particular good. And that is the problem. And we've seen that import restrictions and then the overall policy tool of whether it's a restriction or change in tariff also being abused in terms of what we saw with the sugar import levy, where it's just overnight went from 50 rupees to 25 cents or something like that. And then a few weeks later again goes back to the original. So that is the kind of abuse, and that is because of this discretionary power that's been provided to the Ministry of Finance, to the Ministry of Trade, Department of Commerce, etc., to decide these things without any parliamentary process, without any debate on the matter, without doing any sort of analysis of that policy. That is what I see in terms of the import restrictions, and they create a lot of distortions. It's not, you don't have to be ideological about it, but be practical of the distortions that import restrictions have created in Sri Lanka so far. We could do with a lot less import restrictions if we had to, get out of the crisis we have right now. It's not a matter of, completely banning the use of policy of import restrictions, but Sri Lanka could do with a lot less import restrictions and reducing the discretionary power of the authorities to, do overnight gazetting of import restrictions, so that, businesses have more consistent policy environment, operating environment for them to make their business decisions. Let them make the decisions instead of having overnight gazettes.
Thank you, Thilina. I completely agree with your points, and especially in the fact that how you mentioned these policies need to be looked at holistically, and doing these ad hoc kind of changes doesn't really help in the overall the long-term environment for the country. So just a reminder to our audience, the session will be ending in a few minutes. So if you have any questions, please do send them into the question box. We are discussing the role of the export sector and in the current situation. So another question that we've kind of gotten in from a lot of our viewers is, So, in terms of these mandatory conversions that have to take place, so the 25, and they moved it to 75%, and now back to 25%. Now there's talk of removing it entirely. So I was wondering what your sentiments are on this as an exporter, and of course, Thilina, if you have any views to add to that as well. Mr. Prasanna, if you'd like to start.
Yeah. Basically, the conversion, the mandatory conversion, I just explained process here. The conversion, what we need to do in the latest circular from the central bank, they are allowing certain expenses. Example, the out of your remittance, whatever you are getting, we can do the outward remittance is in respect of those transactions, and then we can take foreign currency note if permitted foreign currency note, and then we can do some investment in Sri Lanka, and we can purchase development bond in foreign currency. There's a cap on that, and then again we can buy services even in Sri Lanka. We can purchase some services to do that particular production, and the balance. And you can serve your debts also with this foreign currency and the residual. Now, what is applicable for most of us is if there are any residual value amount, you need to convert. That's the current law applicable. Then it's a additional burden. They are giving only 1 month's time where when you get the remittance, 1 month time, you need to do all this, then balance we need to convert. That's how they calculated the residual value. Each bank, if you are working with the 5-6 bank, each bank, we need to have a separate reconciliation, separate process to handle this. Otherwise, the 7th day of next month, automatically, whatever available, if we want to do some payment, automatically it will be converted to the rupees based on their discretion. That's the current situation. But of course, there are certain things as an export organization, we get the dollars and we need to do some kind of, actually, every month we need to do our salaries, the payments are rupees. We do the conversion, but this conversion process will create us currently huge conversion issues in monitoring this aspect. That's how we face currently. Thilina, to add anything, Thilina?
Yes, so I think the operational problems, that's very clear what Prasanna has just said. It's not something exporters who are very vital to the current situation, should be put through, because they have to then use their human resources to another process, right? In addition to handling things like taxes and customs, getting those cleared, handling the labor side, you need to also now have 6 teams working with your 6 banks to clear these things up, and that's hassle that you all don't need to be to spending in a time of crisis, getting your operations going. For me, from a policy perspective, it's also again policy uncertainty that was brought in by this mandatory conversion. Ideally, something like this should be done on a longer term policy basis. If the government has, the central bank as part of its reserve management, talks with the exporters, look, maybe 5% or maybe 10% of earnings, if we can have maybe a quarterly arrangement where, there's a mandatory conversion, because we want to build non-debt reserves. So the central bank has a discourse with the exporters as part of its reserve management to do that. Instead of that, when they realized they were in trouble in early 2021 with regards to reserve management, they put in the mandatory conversion. And then I remember they did it in February. They rescinded, they suspended in March. Then again brought it back in May with changes. That operated, and then in October of last year, they again changed, brought changes in. So there was not even, okay, fine, they had a crisis, they brought in a policy, but at least have consistency there onwards. No, that means even they hadn't figured out how to implement it. And that meant the exporters have to go through problems. The banks weren't sure how they have to handle their clients. And for the banks, the exporters are important clients. They can't handle properly with due care, because they also have to meet the central bank's requirements. So again, it's that policy inconsistency side. And I remember, on a personal scale, right? Late last year, I was working for a foreign entity, and then I stopped making my claims for my consultancy fee, because I wasn't sure how my bank was going to process my foreign currency fees. So that meant that the government, the country wasn't actually getting inflows because I was holding my fees abroad, which should have otherwise just come in on a monthly basis. So this is the kind of inconsistencies that are created by these kind of laws. Because even though I'm aware of the overall issues, I'm not sure how it's being implemented, right? So for me, I keep track of the central bank's directives or the gazettes that come out, and I wasn't sure how this was happening. I call the bank manager; he doesn't know how this is going to be treated. So you would imagine how someone who's a non-economist or someone who's not a banker is going to, someone who's doing their remittances, who is, working for a foreign company as a consultant, they panic obviously, and they do things that shouldn't, that actually end up making things worse. And we've seen this happening with remittances so far, and that's made Sri Lanka's position worse than it should be. So the clear thing for me, and the lesson here is policy consistency. If they want to do mandatory conversion as part of their reserve management to build non-debt reserves, which they should be doing, then that should be a wider, with the consultants, with the consent of the exporters, do a system that's, that's good both for the exporters, for the banks, and for the central bank to do that, forex management, forex market management, and the reserve management side. That has to be a consistent policy. And again, maybe 1 year down the road, they'll be like, we don't need to do any conversions now, we are fine. But then again, 3 years down the road, they'll again bring it back when they're in trouble. That shouldn't be the case. There should be consistency on these policies. Have a consistent reserve management policy that doesn't change when the governor changes, when the government changes.
Thank you, Thilina, and thank you, Mr. Prasanna. I think you brought up this very apt point that there's consistent inconsistency in our policy environment, right? That's affecting so many people, so many businesses, and I think we're seeing it so prevalent today. And in that kind of light, I was wondering if Mr. Prasanna, you could shed some light on this talk that there's lots of exporters moving out of the country, and like we established the fact that the export industry, as a whole, is very important to Sri Lanka. So if you could tell us if this rumor of export industry is leaving the country and like the effect that could have in not the current short term, but the longer term kind of impact that will have.
Yeah. Now, I look at this way now. Now, our Sri Lanka, we are expecting economy to grow. Year by year, we are looking at certain percentage to grow. But our population, we are looking at 21 million. To grow, this population is very small. If you do the domestic production, your growth potential is very limited. Then our real growth should come from the export business. Now look at our export, where we stuck now. The apparel we have say 5 billion, and again we'll say 30 to 40% is net because we import a lot of items for the apparel, and then other one is the tea, again contributing. And that growth concept or the policy is not very clear to grow our economy. That's where the main concern. Now, if you really look at the Singapore, China, or other Asian countries, you have a lot of example how the countries are going, even the IT industry, how we can do. That growth or policy is missing in our country. That's where this entire crisis, what I see, that's where we are right now. Still, we are on the this traditional. That industry also, government is putting severe restriction. See how we are currently running, as I mentioned, we import, export, again process, the foreign currency conversion, again new process, in addition to the other processes we have to go through. Now, by now, if you develop a lot of export markets are there, if we have our export basket, now rather than keeping 2-3 items, if it is big basket, today our country will be in the different region. That has to be, I think that's the clear thing that we need to look at, and that's how the policy makers need to look at, give incentive, we'll be able to get a lot of foreign. Basically, the FDI should be able to get the FDI with the export revenue, will make this country into a next level. I think that's what my taking on this export, how industry can play.
Thank you, sir. I think that was very well said, and I completely agree. The fact that Sri Lanka, at the end of the day, is a relatively small economy, and like if we are to compete with the rest of the world and grow, we also have to engage with the rest of the world, and those kinds of policies need to be implemented so that that's allowed. Thilina, I'm curious, do you have anything in terms of, because also Mr. Prasanna, you mentioned how the export basket has not been diversified for years, and I'm sure Thilina, you'd have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of diversification is the big problem that we've had. Apparel sector has been supporting the economy since the late 80s in terms of, the real driver of the exports. Before that was tea and rubber. And the reason we didn't have a bigger crisis in the late 80s is because apparel took off. And our economy was small enough back then that apparel takeoff managed to get us out of the problems we had in the late 90s. It gave us that push to get through to the 2000s. And since the 2000s, we've essentially been growing, especially with the non-tradable sector, as they call it, construction and domestic services, domestic oriented. And that's what's, driven, the growth over the last 15, 20 years. Yes, that growth needs to happen because, that, helps, domestic living standards and improved services for locals. But that happened in an unsustainable manner. The export side, the foreign earnings side could not support, keep up with the growing domestic sector, domestic non-tradable sector. And we are finally where we are, and we managed to extend that unsustainable period because we were able to access the markets, borrow more and more, and keep that unsustainable growth strategy going. But right now, it's given up. We no longer have the balance sheet space to keep supporting that unsustainable part. We need the exports to support us. Of course, in the near term, we might not be able to, grow new exports very fast to, get out of town. Would have to be the existing sectors that have to grow and support. First, ensure that the existing sectors can survive this crisis, and then, support them for growth, and then also get new investments for new sectors. And of course, getting those kind of investments first requires the existing investors to stay in the country, right? And invest more in their capacity. And in the future, to attract new investment, I think we need to also end our, attraction to these, big ticket investments that come in, a $500 million hotel complex as the ideal FDI. We need to, be much more concerned about, the foreign company that is going to spend $1 million, $5 million to set up a small facility at first for a new sector. Give them the support, give them the free trade zones, and expand our free trade zones. Make the free trade zones, more competitive. Get foreign players to invest in, putting up free trade zone in Sri Lanka, not just having to depend on the BOI to set up new free trade zones, so that then foreigners can come and invest in small scale facilities at first, which then they will reinvest in to expand capacity. We can't expect new sectors, diversification of our exports with sudden, $500 million investments into the country. That is, yes, big ticket, investments in the near term will help us get out of this current crisis, but that's not how we can diversify exports in the future, especially the goods side. And even we've seen in the near, last few years, we've gotten small scale, investments, even the IT side. It's very small scale investments that come in, which then scale up and provide the services sector growth. On the other hand, so we will need to really change that addiction to like wanting these big scale investments, and also to give a lot of care to smaller scale investors who come in and invest in new sectors. That will be a slow process, but clearly, as we discussed earlier, you need policy consistency to attract investors. First, to keep the domestic and the existing investors, in the country, and then to attract new ones. It's going to be a, hard process, slow process, but that's where we need to aim at. And that is why we know the adjustment period that's coming in the next few years is vital to set down that, show that Sri Lanka is committed to a certain degree of policy consistency going forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Thilina. That brought up some very interesting points. And especially in terms of, I think we've been talking a lot about the problems that the country is facing, and like, I think our audience can agree with us today, there is a lot to talk about. So one other thing that I would like to kind of touch on is the exchange rate. And I believe it's getting worse and worse day by day, and Curious, Mr. Prasanna, how do you see this playing out, and how has this affected you? And of course, Thilina, I would love to hear what you have to say about the whole situation in general.
So what is happening is the daily, actually we can't predict. Earlier we used to prepare the budget. Now right now we are stuck somewhere. We can't predict anything right now. Tomorrow is totally different. Therefore we have an issue right now, as I mentioned earlier, the quoting a price to the buyer, because we don't know. Now we are quoting today prices to do the production in another 6 months time. We don't know what will be our real cost in 6 months time. That's actually currently we are not sure. We can't predict. We never expect dollar to be in this level. We never predicted. But it's really uncertain because we don't see any the policy or any action taken from the policy makers to overcome this issue. We don't see anything. Near future, medium term, long term, we don't see anything. Right now, it's a very hard question to answer. We need to manage the very shorter period as companies. We need to manage. We can't manage. We can't even predict. We can't make a budget in the next 6 months. We manage with very limited information because we are really uncertain. We are uncertain because there's no clear cut short term to medium term to long term. I think Thilina can add a lot on this.
I mean, a big part of my job is, trying to help the private sector on the exchange rate side. And of course, numbers we've thrown, we've, guided our clients, but, things are in the adverse, right? And that's not the good situation. And as again, it's inconsistency, right? Firms aren't able to plan their budgets, their purchasing, and their pricing. And not being able to do that means that you can't get new orders, you can't give that consistency to the buyers. And these aren't buyers who are there to ensure that the garment sector exists in Sri Lanka for the next 5 years, right? They have their own competitive businesses to run, so they can't be waiting and giving all the doubt, the measure of doubt. So that is the problem. And of course, right now we are having a big loss of confidence in the economy, in the forex market, and a big complaint, of course, is that the central bank is supposed to have floated the exchange rate, but there is no dollars to purchase in the market. You kind of even if you bid higher, you can't really get dollars. So there's a big problem of confidence in the forex market. And it will take some time. You need the positive news inflow to come in. We need more bridging finance, whether it's bilateral partners, multilateral partners, to be confirmed, so that we at least know next week we'll have our petrol, right? And part of this forex issue is everyone's running with a full tank of petrol, right? And that means we need to pay more. We need to find funds for more and more petrol and diesel itself. And at the same time, maybe the remitters don't want to send their funds to Sri Lanka because it's not only are they not sure whether they're not sure about the political side of things. There's that uncertainty. They also have other concerns of their savings and all of that. They want to keep some dollars at hand. So that whole lack of confidence, the lack of confidence loop has really been broken. It's become a vicious cycle. So for that, we need news coming in. We need, which is why, the central bank governor is also trying to say 2 to 3 months, we are trying to ensure the IMF program can be finalized to some extent, try to create that, confidence in the system. Try to say, look, there is going to be, we expect the kind of, he's trying to signal there's a peak coming up, and then after that, the rupee, the exchange rate will stabilize. So he's trying to do that, and they're working. I think they're trying to work through and get that side, whether it's the restructuring, whether it's the bridging finance. So that news flow is going to be vital, and I hope that on the political side, they realize that they need to also help create that stability, that confidence in this overall system, if we are going to get out of this immediate situation where we just see the exchange rate keep moving up, and even if it moves up, there isn't really dollars to purchase to keep the system running. So it's a loss of confidence right now, And I really hope that good news comes forth in the next couple of months to start turning the tide.
Yeah, thank you, Thilina. And on that note, I think we've been talking about all of these uncertain times, inconsistency policies, and all these just kind of sentiments that are not very positive. But in line with this live ending shortly, I would like to kind of ask both of you for any kind of thoughts that you have in terms of how to kind of get out of this situation from an exporter's point of view, from an economist's point of view. What are the kind of policies that you think should be focused on to kind of get through not only get through the current situation, but like how you see Sri Lanka as a whole in the long term, the next 10 years?
Right. So to start with, I think first thing what we need to get it is the political stability that has to be clearly defined, and that has to be seen by the global. Then only the investors and other buyers will look at Sri Lanka again as the preferred supplier. That's the first thing in my priority list. That's the first thing we need to look at. And then all this unrest situation in the country should go off. Then look at then our policy, our finance policy. Basically, the next step is to, when the government is established, you need to get the correct policy done in the short term, medium term to long term. That is lacking, I think, last 2-3 years. People were talking, but nothing. We didn't see any structured policy being revealed or implemented. All ad hoc decisions were taken. Then basically the general public, their living standard, our living standards, we need to cater to that essential items through whatever means. We need to get all this scarcity go off. And long term, as I mentioned, to grow the country, export market should be looked at very seriously, and that's how your long term you see the country prosperity. Otherwise, we will have this issue, or our standards will come down if you don't look at that way. If you don't increase our export market, I think what we are facing now, the next stage is to now we are going through the queue and getting the items. I think next stage is to we don't have those stuff. That's at the next stage. I think before coming to that level, we need to look at short-term strategy and the medium-term, long-term, develop this into a next level. I think those are the key things what I look at. The media attention is needed. What we expect from the policy makers.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, agreeing with all those points raised. I think one thing is, Sri Lanka isn't the first country that's going through a debt crisis. There's been other countries that have gone through debt crises, whether they're government debt or private sector debt crises. We saw that during the Asian financial crisis. A lot of the Southeast Asian countries, which had great, export sectors, they still had problems that they had to face. They had to go through adjustments, whether it's for the private sector and for the government sector. They went through those adjustments, and they committed to those adjustments over a period of time, and they're doing much better now. Even countries like Indonesia, which were at lower per capita GDP numbers, now are at and now because of our crisis, they'll be much above our per capita GDP over the next few years. And they've built their institutions over time. They've created credibility in those institutions. They've ensured that those institutions are well functioning, that they can attract good talent into those public sector institutions, into those systems, so that then they can function well. That is that long-term path to getting out of this. Right now, things look very, very bleak for Sri Lanka. It's not easy to see how Sri Lanka can get out of this. But if there is policy consistency, if we consistently commit to the adjustment process that Sri Lanka needs to go get out of this, of course, immediately getting out of this crisis, but beyond that, getting out of the crisis, then that adjustment period, whether it's, not just thinking of it as, okay, we need to agree to the IMF policies. It's policies that Sri Lanka should establish, whether you look at it from, a neoliberal perspective, a leftist perspective, or pragmatic perspective, whatever you like to, see, or, the window through which you want to look at the world. there are certain practical things that Sri Lanka needs to do, that, bad policies that we've been doing for a long time, are wrong, institutional practices. We need to fix those. We need to make, the business environment easier for our companies, and also, public services easier for our people. And that is the road to get out of this crisis in the longer term. But other countries have gone through these crises, they've gotten out of these crises. Yes, it's taken them, 5, 7, 8 years to get out of and get back to where they were before the crisis. But that, countries have gotten out of the crises, and we can do that too. For that, we need policy consistency going forward.
Thank you, Thilina. I think that's a really great way to kind of end today's discussion, and talks about the hopes and how good policy can really help get us out of this situation. I want to thank the both of you for taking the time today to join us in today's discussion, and also the audience. Thank you for sending in your questions, and thank you for joining amidst everything that's going on and all the power cuts. I'm sure it's not easy. And of course, this recording will be available on our social media pages, so please do keep an eye out for that. And we will be doing more talks like this to kind of answer as many questions as we possibly can. So please keep an eye out on those notifications. Thank you once again, Thilina. Thank you, Mr. Prasanna. It was great having you on the show today. Have a good evening. And
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.